I'm gonna be completely honest, I only read 6 books this month, and that's because I spent this entire month either listening to One Direction instead of listening to audiobooks, and if I wasn't listening to One Direction, I was watching videos of One Direction on YouTube. So that's where my time has gone this month. Hello, my name is Elise, and this is going to be a rather quick November wrap-up because I only read 6 books. I usually read a lot more, but you know what? I was surprised looking back that I read a whole 6 books because I thought I read like 2, so I'm not complaining, and even though it is a lot less than I usually read, by seriously a lot, I still read some really good books, and they were of a diverse range, so I'm not complaining. I thought this was a good month even though I didn't read too much, but yeah, let's get into it, and I hope you find some of these books as interesting as I did. The first book I'm mentioning is the only book this month that I didn't give 4 or 5 stars. I only gave it 3, but it's a relatively new release called Sasha, Masha, and it's about a teenager named Alex. He goes by he, him pronouns the entire book, but he starts questioning his gender identity and whether he really does identify as male. I thought it was a good book for a YA contemporary that deals with queer themes. I've read many of these kinds of books, but I think the reason why I only gave it 3 stars is it had so much potential and I was enjoying it, and then it ended. It felt like an incomplete story, which was why I was slightly disappointed because it was in fact very good and I did like the writing, but I just thought this book could use a bit more to it. I really liked the main character and the side characters and all the friendships and the themes in this book, but I didn't think they were very developed. They could have been more developed. They definitely started off pretty strong, but it just felt like it ended in a place where it didn't really need to end, and even if this is just the beginning of this character's story, I still felt like it left the reader wanting more of an explanation of what was going on in the character's head. The next book I'm going to talk about is something I'm super excited about. I'm sure you've heard of it. It is One Last Stop. I was so excited when I saw I got approved for an e-arc of this book, and it lived up to all my expectations. It was wonderful. In case you haven't heard of One Last Stop, it's a sapphic adult novel. It's contemporary, but it centers around this theme of time travel, which was really interesting. I did not know how that was going to work because I haven't read time travel books before, but it actually ended up working so well. I could go on forever about this book. It was wonderful, but basically it's about this college student, and she's been jumping around to different colleges. She ends up in New York and she wants to finish her degree. She meets some interesting roommates, all that good stuff, but also here's where the sapphic stuff comes in. She meets a girl on the train. Pretty early on, the main character, August, and this girl, Jane, on the train, that rhymes, they hit it off right away. They keep running into each other, except August kind of figures out there's something weird about Jane, namely the fact that she's always on the train and she's always dressed in the same outfit, and it's a little suspicious. But I thought the author did such a good job of incorporating these time travel themes because, again, I've not read time travel before, and I was surprised how well it worked. And I think that was the main thing I really loved about this book, despite the sapphicness usually being my favorite component of a book, and it was in this case, but also I was just so impressed with how many plot points there were that all seemed to come together at the end. I just thought it was so impressive, and as someone who really struggles with plotting, I mean, I tried to do NaNoWriMo this month and I failed at 3,000 words because I couldn't plan anything. I just thought it was amazing the way that this author took so many elements and so many little subplots and problems and all of these interesting themes, and they seemed so separate from each other, and then they all tied up, and it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. Look out for One Last Stop in 2021. You will not regret it. The next book I read was Long Way Down, and this was a fantastic read. It is a YA contemporary in verse, and it's about a kid whose brother is murdered, and the whole book takes place in these 60 seconds where he's deciding whether or not he's going to seek revenge. I knew this was going to be a heavy book going into it just based off of the synopsis, but I thought it was beautifully done. The verse was really wonderful. It was emotional. I wanted to read it all in one sitting. If you are not familiar with novels in verse, or if you don't usually like them, I would still give this one a chance. I thought the verse was beautiful. It was easy to follow, but with the minimum amount of words, it was still very impactful, and I got a lot out of it. And also there's a graphic novel that just recently came out that I want to read, so all good things for this author. I want to read more. I think he has some more books, so that is something that will happen in the future, maybe when I'm out of this terrible reading slump. The next book I read was The Midnight Library, and I had no idea what it was about when I went into it. All I knew was the cover was very pretty, and it's not usually the kind of book I read. It's adult fiction. I think it would fall under the category of magical realism / fantasy. I'm not sure. I've only read one magical realism book, so I'm not sure if I'm using that genre correctly in this context, but it is about a woman who is not very satisfied with her life, and she ends up trying to take her own life, and the whole book takes place in this section of her life where she's in between life and death. In this in-between zone of life and death, there's this magical library, and every single book in this library represents a different life that the main character could have had. So the entire book takes place in this in-between zone where she's just taking books off the shelf and seeing how her life would end up if she lived a different life, if she had made different decisions. And it was beautiful. It was a very quiet kind of book, but I just really felt the character's emotions. It really resonated with me. I did not think that this book was going to impact me as much as it did, but I really loved the character. I really related to everything that she was feeling, and I thought the themes were just so important. And it's really not the kind of feelings and themes that I usually see explored in books in this kind of manner, because it was very gentle in a way, even though it was dealing with such heavy themes of mental health. So I would highly recommend this one if you get the chance. The writing was so beautiful, and it is much different than the normal YA that I usually read, but it wasn't impossible to read or very dense like some adult books. So I would again try to pick this up if you can, because it was very beautiful and so comforting in a way. So the next book I read was a music memoir. I don't think anyone will find it surprising what the memoir was. It's called Zayn by Zayn, the guy who was once upon a time part of One Direction and now makes his own music as a solo artist. And I did not know he had a book, but also I didn't know who he was a month ago, so that makes sense. But I had to check the book out when I saw it was at my library. I was interested, and just from a fan perspective, I guess, it was interesting to read. I love reading about people's lives. I know some people think memoirs can be a little conceited, I don't know, but I think they're interesting. I like them, and I thought, again, from a fan perspective, that it was interesting. I liked hearing more of Zayn's thoughts on things, but from a book reviewer point of view, it could maybe use an editor. Some of the sentences were not the best. I kind of wanted to pull out a red pen the whole time, which is a little rude, but whatever. And I thought the structure of the book was a mess. It was literally so weird. He goes on so many different tangents, and it's just like, I don't know, he just threw everything in there, but with no sort of transition. It was kind of weird. Like, he talked about being a character in fan fiction, and then immediately after talked about some serious mental health issues, but like they weren't connected in any way, and I was like, what's going on? But other than that, I thought it was super fun to read this memoir because, you know, I'm going through the whole 1D phase right now, which is terrifying, but I'm having fun. And then on a completely different note, the last book I read this month was In the Dream House. This is another memoir, very different topic. It is about domestic abuse and what it means to be a queer woman. I thought this was very heavy to read. I had to listen to the audiobook while I was reading the book because it was just a lot, but not just the subjects, which were, of course, very heavy and emotional, but the writing style was so different than any memoir I've ever read. It was incredibly poetic, and it used second-person point of view, which was very interesting, but I thought it worked really well with the book, which was very surprising, because that's not usually a point of view that you see or that most people can tolerate when you do see it. So I was very impressed that the author was able to pull this off. I would not recommend this book if you are not in a place to consume books about very detailed psychological trauma or sexual abuse, because that is pretty much at the heart of this book. But if you can read that kind of topic, I thought this was probably one of the best memoirs I've ever read. I mean, the writing was incredibly impressive, and I thought that every single sentence in this book had meaning, which is something you don't always see in books. I feel like you should see it in books, but not very often do you actually see it. So I was very impressed with the structure of this book and the actual contents. I was highlighting pretty much every passage on my Kindle, and overall I thought this was a great book to end the month with. And that is it for this video, I guess. It was only 6 books, but that's okay because I enjoyed the books. You know, there's always next month to read more books, which is, you know, totally fine. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye. Is